Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to look at Revelation 11, 3 through 12 briefly to show how it interfaces with another motif that we saw in our sermon this past weekend. We're going to see in other weeks coming up. We're going to look at Daniel 7:25. And then, spoiler, we're going to look at the very last words of this book, Daniel chapter 12, verses 9 through 13. Not doing an exhaustive study of those yet. We're only in chapters 4 and 5 right now of Daniel in our study, but I want to put some interpretive keys on your radar, show you more and more how Daniel and Revelation overlap. And I want to do for you what my music theory professors did in my bachelor's degree when I majored in music. I was a percussion performance major, and so I was absolute bottom of the barrel when it came to my knowledge of music theory. The best that I could do is play four-mallet marimba, which has some pretty cool literature to it, but just for perspective, that's like playing piano with only two fingers on each hand. And there are piano performance majors, and a future roommate of mine at the time was an organ performance major, 10 fingers and both of his feet on top of that. And so these were students who, even while they were in high school, had vast knowledge of music theory compared to mine, and they could do this thing called CLEP out. They just took a test and they showed like, I don't need music theory 1 or 2. And some of the vocal performance majors could even CLEP out of post-tonal oral skills and stuff like that. But I had to take them all. And the basic piano classes for performance majors, because everybody has to have some proficiency in piano. One of the things that they did for us, for which I'm grateful, was set some rules with the caveat that they're going to break those rules. You can't have two pitches at the same time moving in parallel fifths. You can't have parallel octaves. And I already knew enough about pop music to know like those rules get broken a lot as it is. They're like, so look, for our purposes now, until we get to a certain point in the content, we're going to have these rules that are in place, but just know those rules are going to be broken. And then it was supposed to be like a party the day those rules got broken, but really it meant everything got more complicated. And I was at least grateful for the heads up. Because you can imagine how frustrating it would have been for me. Look, I just want to drum, I just want to hit things with sticks. And they're setting all these rules. And then one day they're like, those rules that we've been following for however long, those aren't rules anymore. I would have been like, what was the point? They show us this structure and they show us where it's consistent. And then you get into more advanced content. And what was previously a consistency is no longer a consistency. So I want you to see the distinction in this time, times, and half a time as it overlaps from Daniel to Revelation, which it does. And then this coming exception in the very last words of Daniel. Here's Daniel 7:25. Okay, again, we haven't gotten to this yet, so if this seems obscure to you, just know I'm showing you an interpretive tool. So you have this on your radar so you understand the time, times, and half a time thing. That's a rule that we have for now, that when we get to the very last chapter of Daniel, you're going to see it's a different usage. It's a different setting. Here's Daniel 7:25. He will speak words against the Most High. We're talking about the beast of Revelation here. All right, that's colloquially known as the Antichrist. Eventually, I'm going to stop making that explanation, but it's just, I got a lot to overcome here. The Left Behind series sold a lot of books. And oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. This is a prophecy, I believe, about the second half of the 7 years of tribulation, specifically referred to as the Great Tribulation. And even I came upon one commentator who just refers to that second half, that 3.5 years, as tribulation, and everything else is sort of a prelude to it, even though it's pretty bad. Daniel is using this phrase, a time, times, and half a time. Talk about a year plus 2 years plus half a year. That's 3.5 years. And he's doing so in an era in which every major culture measured the number of days in a year as 360. Here's Revelation 11, one of for what it's worth, I think is one of the most interesting prophecies in Revelation about the two witnesses, these two bad to the bone dudes who are going to be able to give testimony about the Lord, and they're equipped with miraculous authority to defend themselves and make their message known. And that's because they're undeniable. And there's not a single human being who has ever encountered a word of their ministry during their time on earth who could say, nobody ever shared the gospel with us. We never saw anything that should persuade us that Jesus is Lord. Here's Revelation 11. Verse 3, I will grant my two witnesses authority to prophesy 1,260 days dressed in sackcloth. So 360 times 3.5, and check my math on it, that's 1,260 days. Okay. And if you're skeptical, I can even maybe do it on my phone real quick. All right. Let's see. I'm gonna see how close I can get with this camera. I don't know if this is going to actually help. So you might just check on your own phone so you see what I'm talking about. 360, that's the standard number of days in a year in every major culture in Daniel's day, times 3.5 equals 1,260. Can you guys read that? Probably barely. This is some high quality professional video stuff we're doing here, everybody. That's 3.5 years according to the 360 day year. So back to Revelation 11, that means that these two witnesses dressed in sackcloth, typically a sign of mourning and grief, are ministering for a time, times, and half a time. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and consumes their enemies. Can you see why I've been pretty enamored with this prophecy since I was a little kid and read Revelation for the first time? It was like, this is amazing. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These guys are fire-breathing prophets. They have authority to close up the sky so that it does not rain during the days of their prophecy. They also have the power over waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague whenever they want. Dude, Stan Lee, in his most imaginative day, couldn't have picked that out. He might have even gotten the idea for one of the X-Men from this. This is intense. They have the authority to close up the sky so that it doesn't rain. Okay, so think this sort of harkens back to the prophecies of Elijah. And they have the power to turn the waters into blood. This draws a parallel to Revelation and Exodus. This is probably why we studied Exodus before doing this. A systematic theology behind all of our exposition of in the tradition of Gerhardus Voss, of Vossian biblical theology, I hope. Wow, I hope I didn't just misuse that name and fail to do remote justice to it, because I'm not worthy to keep company with people like Voss. I'm just aspiring to it, so pray for me. So these guys have the ability to close up the sky. They have the ability to turn water into blood and strike the earth with every plague whenever they want. So you could see you can imagine these two witnesses could use some of the Exodus plagues. When they finish their testimony, the beast, again, that's the Antichrist, that comes up from the abyss will make war on them, conquer them, and kill them. Their dead bodies will lie in the main street of the great city, which figuratively is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So a brief aside on this, they're not literally in Sodom, nor are they in Egypt. They're in Jerusalem. But that's how bad things will have gotten at this point in prophetic history, that Jerusalem is called figuratively, see that word, Sodom and Egypt. And some of the peoples, tribes, languages, and nations will view their bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their bodies to be put into a tomb. Do you think that's deliberate? 3.5 days? Where else have you seen this before? The idea of being buried for 3 days, but specifically it says 3.5 days. It is a time, times, and half a time, but in terms of days. And that's how long their bodies are just lying in the street. And you have people from multiple nations who are able to view their bodies. This is something that was used to make fun of the Bible until probably the 1940s and 50s. This was something that was used to poke fun at prophetic history. Like, how are people from every nation going to look at two dead guys in the street? Those who live on the earth will gloat over them and celebrate and send gifts to one another because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. How had they tormented them? Well, they defended themselves with fire from their mouths. They could make it stop raining, and they could make water turn to blood. They could release whatever plague they wanted. Anybody who would oppose them has to be consumed by fire. These are the two witnesses. And they're proclaiming the true gospel, and they're defending themselves. But that's considered torment by the people on the earth at the time. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet. Great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." They went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies watched them. See, that's one of the most fascinating prophecies in Revelation to me. And we see the same motif, a time times and half a time. All right, 1260 days. And then also the 3.5 days on a smaller scale while they're dead. So a time times and half a time is a motif that comes up over and over again in Daniel, over and over and again in Revelation. And you could see how that's consistent, Daniel 7 to Revelation 11. But here is the coming exception. Okay, don't say you weren't warned. This was coming. Here are the final words of the book of Daniel. He said, "Go on your way, Daniel, for the words are secret and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, cleansed, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly. None of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. From the time the daily sacrifice is abolished," all right, I'm going to resist the urge to start preaching Daniel 12 because it's one of the most incredible chapters. Daniel chapters 9 and 12 are some of the most incredible chapters anything ever written. This, by the way, points to the fact that it's mostly a Jewish population, okay, that they're carrying out sacrifices daily. From the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Happy is the one who waits for and reaches 1,335 days. But as for you, go on your way to the end. You will rest, and then you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance at the end of days. Wow. I can't conceive of or just imagine a better sentence to close out a book of prophecy or a word to hear from the Lord's servant, from one of the Lord's angels to the Lord's prophet, Daniel. So we'll get to this. We'll talk more about what happened and was it 167 to 169 BC when Antiochus Epiphanes IV, some people pronounce it Antiochus, the first professor I ever had, Dr. Larry Dick at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, said Antiochus, and that's just the way I've always said it, so forgive me if I pronounce it differently from you. Pointed out that there would be something like an abomination of desolation. Every time there's an idol set up, that's an abomination. This particular abomination, though, is one of desolation. It results in desolation. The daily sacrifices are abolished. It's true. Antiochus Epiphanes IV did abolish things. He tried to make, was it the reading of the Torah, a capital offense, and sacrificed a pig on the altar, which was grotesquely offensive. And he set up a pagan idol in the Holy of Holies. This lasted 3 years, not 3.5 years. And also the time frame is different. So it couldn't be that Daniel was speaking strictly about Antiochus Epiphanes IV, because the time frames don't add up to what actually happened with Antiochus Epiphanes IV. You could see absolutely the striking parallels, the pattern that emerges in prophetic history from this pattern in Daniel's prophecy and what happened under Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Happy Hanukkah, by the way, like it's about that time, which it celebrates the rededication of the temple after that, to what the Antichrist is going to do. But I wanted to put this on your radar too, even as I keep showing this times, and half a time motif. There's a day coming that it's got an extra 30 days. It's an extra 30 days. Where are those extra 30 days? We'll talk more about that and what it could be. Some of it will harken back to our study of Ezekiel and the battle of Gog and Magog and some of the cleanup that happens of the dead bodies that are strewn after this massive battle. And we'll talk more about this figure as well, 1,335 days. Happy is the one who waits for and reaches 1,335 days. But as for you, like Daniel, you're not going to be here for any of this. You go on your way to the end. You will rest. You're going to die an old man, right? And then you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance at the end of the days. That's what we're all going for right there, my friend. So times, and half a time usually means 1,260. But when we get to the final verses of Daniel 12, we're talking about a different time frame. It's very similar. There's an extra month built in to this one, and this is a different figure entirely. Okay, so welcome to Music Theory 1, where you learn some rules of interpretation, and then you're given the proper heads up in advance that when we get to the more advanced material at the end of the book, that rule that we've just established, you're going to see a different iteration. Okay, things are going to change. So most of the time, a time times and half a time means 3.5. And when we get to the very last verses, you're going to see those different numbers, 1290 and 1335. When we get to Daniel 12, we'll talk more about what that could represent. So keep this on your radar.